Hello everyone, this is John from WP Mayor, and in this episode today we're going to be discussing WordPress security, a very hot topic. Whenever we publish a post about WordPress security, it's one of the most followed topics on WP Mayor. So I'm glad to have with me Robert Abela, who's a security expert and has recently switched over to WordPress and also developed the security plugin. I'll let Robert introduce himself before we pass on to some of the topics we'll be discussing today.
Hello, I'm Robert Abela. We have a website called wpsecurity.com. We provide WordPress security services such as WordPress hardening and WordPress security audits, and we also develop, as Jean already explained, a WordPress security plugin.
So let's start from the very basic. Many users ask us experts, what are the security considerations to be aware of when starting a website in WordPress? Now, as you all know, WordPress involves having the base installation, and then you also have hosting, plugins, and themes, which are the main considerations. How does security actually go into these three aspects of WordPress?
To start off with, security in WordPress can be very straightforward. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of pitfalls where you can make mistakes, but in general, it's very straightforward. As a general rule of thumb, basically, if you always keep your WordPress updated, and the software you are using, if it's always the latest version, and if you use strong passwords, that's already like you're a step ahead of the majority of people. You're already quite secure. Then, of course, there are a lot of other things which you can do, like installing additional plugins, which we'll talk about later, to improve the security. But by default, as long as you keep your software updated, not just WordPress, because even, for example, your computer, because if your computer is hacked and at that stage you're uploading files, for example, malicious users can actually use your computer to access your website, kind of a proxy through your computer. So it's important to always use latest software, and it's always updated. The second one is to always use very strong credentials, both passwords and usernames. Even usernames, for example, using default username sometimes is a problem. Admin, everyone knows that username. So ideally you should make some kind of unique username which you will remember. Passwords as well, at least it should be 8 characters long, should contain both letters, numbers, and also special characters like question mark, etc. And as well, you should always keep a backup, because it's always a very good safety net for your website.
Yeah, I've been guilty of some of those in the past. So let's start from themes. Everybody wants to install a fresh, nice theme on their website. So how does one know whether one theme is secure or not? And maybe let's talk about the sources for obtaining a WordPress theme. Are there sources which are safer than others?
Definitely there are sources which are safer than others. For example, if you download free themes from the WordPress repository, they are checked. They are kind of quarantined and they are checked. Of course, they can never be perfect. But as far as I remember, there were never any cases where such themes had problems. Of course, in the future, there might be cases where new vulnerabilities might be discovered in these themes. But from the basics checks, they seem okay. If you meet people, for example, a designer, someone says, okay, here's my theme. Usually, you should trust this person. For example, if you need a new theme, if you're not getting a theme from a repository or some other places where they sell themes, if you're just getting a theme from a designer, make sure you work with a designer you know, or perhaps if your friends are bloggers, speak to them, see who they used to develop their themes, and try to use the same people, because by doing that, you're making sure that that person is trusted. I'm not saying don't trust people, but you don't know what... I had an experience myself, which I shared it with you earlier on. I needed a new theme for my website, and after analyzing the theme, I found out that their backdoor was implemented in my website. It seems that some designers, there's this tendency, some designers use it on purpose, just in case they are not paid. They use this backdoor to take the theme back from you. So yeah, pay attention who you use. Always, ideally, you should always try and get references from your fellow bloggers and people like that. But it's important to use, that's the most important thing, is to always use trusted sources. When you hire a designer, ideally, I know it's not always possible, but where possible, just check his work. Go through the code, check every page, check every theme, and make sure that there's nothing, let's say, funny. Okay, sometimes some things only experts can identify, but you can always see, for example, if you see some kind of obfuscated code, like good mixture of letters and numbers, then it might look weird. If it's something looks weird for you, might as well contact someone else and have it checked.
Yeah, let's talk about maybe you spoke a lot about custom themes as well. So most users would not go for a custom theme, I guess. I would imagine that they go and buy a theme or download a free theme from the repository, or go into a marketplace or one of the big theme vendors in WordPress and download those themes. Now, we've also spoken about the GPL on our website. This last couple of weeks, there was a hot topic about getting plugins for free or getting themes for free. And as we know, most themes are GPL, so they can be found for free, although they are being sold by their authors. They can be found for free even on maybe sharing websites, like torrent sharing websites. Would you recommend downloading from there, or is there any difference downloading from the author or downloading from these websites?
Definitely there is a difference, even between the author, and if the author has selling a theme through a popular theme vendor websites and he's distributing his theme for free from his website, I would personally go through the theme vendor, because that's already a trusted source, because thousands of themes are sold from there every day. Even if something happens, you kind of have someone to rely on. You can say, listen, I bought this theme, I have some problems, what can we do? If it's a designer alone, you cannot chase anyone. So I would still go for that. Torrents, that's very questionable. I mean, torrents, there can be a lot of kind of man in the middle attacks. So you might never, unless you really know how to read code, you might never, if you don't know how to read PHP code, you might never tell what is in that theme. So I would ideally go to trusted sources. Even designers, as a person alone designer, there are designers which are kind of well known. And if you look, for example, if a designer has his own website and you look at his forum or people speaking about him or search his name in Google, if you see that he's got a very good amount of feedback, then it's okay. It's okay to get a theme from his website. But it's important to always trust the source. I'm not saying you should always get the theme from a theme vendor website, but always make a kind of background check. Even if you buy, as I just said, if you are going to buy directly from a designer or download from his website, just make a Google. Spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes, Google his name, Google the team name, and see what people say on forums, on the WordPress forums, on other forums, on designer forums, on other websites. That's very important. The kind of a background check.
So I guess the main takeaway as regards to themes is always to make a background check. And if you know actually how to code or have some background in coding, it won't hurt to go through the code and see what functions are being used and whatever. Themes don't tend to be have many files. It depends, but some themes are pretty simple, so a knowledgeable person would easily be able to go through them. I recall having seen that StudioPress, for example, have an audit, a security audit of their themes, which makes it better for the users, as they know that it's an extra layer of trust for the user.
Unfortunately, not every designer can afford. I mean, StudioPress can afford to do it, because usually security audits are quite costly. If I'm a designer just starting up, selling my theme, I don't know, for $20-$30, I definitely won't afford that. Although it's a nice thing to do, I cannot afford security audits. So it's a nice thing, of course. It's kind of a guarantee that people can look for, but you shouldn't expect it from everyone. You know?
I guess if I had to put the question from the author's point of view, how can an author gain the credibility in the theme industry? I think one of the things authors should use is the repository itself, right? Yes. You get a free check, and you make sure that the code is of a certain standard, else it wouldn't be in the repository. And following the success of your themes on the repository, you can then start selling the premium versions, having built the credibility beforehand.
Yes. Yeah. Credibility is very important.
So let's take a look at plugins now. There are around 60,000 plugins in the WordPress, not only on the repository, but so there's a lot of area which can be exploited there. The plugin. How do we make sure that when we download a plugin, it won't break our site and it won't introduce major vulnerabilities?
The plugin, as regards breaking your site, ideally always when you download new software, even a theme, ideally you should always have a local installation of WordPress and test it there before taking it to the live website. If you notice something which is funny there, even just functionality, not just from the security point of view, you're not putting your website in danger. As regards security point of view, again, it's something very similar to the themes. The WordPress repository is one of, let's say, the best adverts any developer can have. Ratings are very important. So if you want to go for a plugin, first, even I personally, I would go to check on the repository and see if there is a plugin with the specific functionality that I want, which if it's there. If there are, let's say, 10 different plugins there, I would check the ratings, the support, and what people are saying about it. Sorry. It's very. I wouldn't base myself just on the ratings, but it's also, for example, plugins, since they are introducing new functionality in WordPress. I would also check their support. Why? Because I don't want to have to install the plugin, have a support issue, and the developer would never reply to me. You know, that's very important as well. The responsive developer, the way they reply. If there are issues, if there have been issues with the plugin, if you search on Google just the plugin name, usually in the first page you would see that there has been some issues. Someone would have reported on a forum. Some official websites like Security, etc., would have a report of that particular vulnerability. So again, by googling the plugin name, it's no harm. Buying premium plugins, again, it's very similar to themes. There are specific websites where I would definitely buy a plugin from there because I know they have a specific standard. I know there's some, at least some background, maybe not a proper security audit, but there is some specific background check. You know, there's been an incident once with the WordPress repository where someone hacked the account of a plugin developer and injected malicious code in the plugin. So when people were downloading that plugin, they were infected. But again, it's a very rare case. Hopefully it doesn't happen every day, and very few people are affected by these things. But if you're buying a premium plugin, again, even if you're buying from the developer's website, by checking the developer's name, the company's name on Google, you always get at least a good amount of feedback, like what they're up to, what's their history, if they had any previous security issues, because there are some plugins which will have security issues depending on their functionality. If they had security issue and it was fixed immediately and they've been around for a year, it's okay. But if a plugin has been around for a year and had 20 security issues, then of course it's a different story. So again, you're kind of being a detective and doing a background check both on the developer and on the plugin itself, because it could also be the developer is quite good, but the type of plugin he's doing is not very good. So he might have two plugins. One of them has a very good history. The other one, unfortunately, has a very bad history. So you shouldn't just check the developer's name. You should just make a proper background check. Usually these things take around 15 minutes. Just check the ratings, check the support forums, check that it does what it says when you download it, and just check its name on Google and see what other people are saying.
So while we're talking about plugins, many people seem to want that special plugin which resolves the security for them. Is there any such plugin? Could there be any such plugin? And what kind of plugins, if there isn't such a plugin, can help us improve our security?
As such, there is no specific single plugin which kind of is a solution for everything in security. There are a lot of different plugins which do different, let's say, security updates. One of the most common security updates is, it's very common with all the most popular plugins, is where they hide the version of WordPress and the README file. As such, somehow it's a good practice if you're part of a targeted attack. But typically hackers, one thing we should keep in mind, that typically hackers, they don't bother, they don't look for these things. What they do, they use automated tools. They scan the internet and for a specific vulnerability, and they don't care what version of WordPress you are. So if your WordPress is vulnerable, that's what they care. So if there's a specific vulnerability in WordPress, let's say 3.2, they just build a scanner to automatically scan a big chunk of the internet, a big chunk of websites, and any of those websites which return they are vulnerable, then they are hacked. Now, as regards plugins, there is no specific one which makes all the things. But what is recommended is a backup plugin is very important, of course. As we said as well, backup is a good safety net for your website. Other plugins which are really good, plugins which can improve the security of your website, such as the login of your website, for example, like using two-step authentication, or as we don't know it as well, Google authentication. Plugins that can monitor your website to see what's actually happening. Plugins that can, for example, help you check the permissions of your files on your web server, so they can say, listen, please change the permissions to this. That's it mostly, but those are the most important things. Plugins, ideally, for example, plugins that can, especially if you are using a multi-user block, plugins that can force users to use a specific password, for example, a strong password, and things like that. It's more about the practicality. As such, plugins to modify WordPress or the way it works, there's not much you can do. There are some plugins, for example. Another good plugin is that can help you implement SSL on WordPress. So the connection between, for example, when you access the WordPress dashboard, the connection between your computer and the WordPress dashboard is encrypted. These type of plugins, but I don't want to kind of put down any particular plugin, but most of the common, let's say, security plugins we see out there, most of them are, I'm not saying gimmicks, because most of them are not gimmicks, but they're not, the things they do, they're not really effective against the type of attacks and threats we are seeing today. What we are seeing today, as I said before, a lot of automated attacks, which are not targeted. So irrelevant if you hide your version or not. If you're, let's say you're running an old version of WordPress and you hide the version, if the automated scanner detects this particular vulnerability on your WordPress, it could be any type of version, any number of version, because if it's exploitable, then they will attack you.
Okay, so let's take a look at WordPress itself now. We know that WordPress is immensely popular nowadays. We have heard figures of around 15 to 20% of the whole web powered by WordPress. That's around 65 million websites or so. Now, obviously, that is a major attraction for people who are starting a website. And obviously, they will hear the term WordPress, they will check out the website, see that it's used on many websites, and they're attracted. At the same time, many people are also exposed to news about WordPress sites being hacked. So there's a bit of a decision to be taken. Should I use WordPress because it's so popular, or should I stay away from WordPress because there are so many hacking stories circling around it? How WordPress is secure? How secure is WordPress maybe in relation to other systems, or as a whole in itself? Is it secure, or is it maybe not coded so well? What's your take on this?
In my opinion, WordPress is a very secure software. In the past, it had its shares of vulnerabilities, like almost any other popular systems, because, as you said, if it's being used by 65 million users, there will be some problems. But yeah, with time, especially since version 3 onwards, very few vulnerabilities in WordPress have been discovered. So as such, as a system, is very robust. One of the main problems we see with WordPress is that it made it easy for many people to have their own websites, and unfortunately, not everyone is in the security field, so not everyone can imagine what hackers can do. Not everyone thinks that they are a target. So of course they're not practicing security properly by using, for example, username, admin, password, and these things is what makes WordPress a target, because hackers, they actually know that most users of WordPress are not security aware, and they're quite lenient, let's say, in the security point of view. So they attack these type of problems. In fact, most of the vulnerabilities we've seen in WordPress lately, they're not vulnerabilities in WordPress. Mostly they are vulnerabilities in plugins. And the most common attacks we're seeing lately are not related to exploiting a WordPress vulnerability, and they're not related to exploiting a plugin vulnerability. Most of them, they are exploiting the user's the user's practicality. For example, trying to detect weak passwords, trying to detect old versions of WordPress. Those are the most common, or some old version of a plugin. So if I think this year or last year there was a vulnerability in those two popular caching plugins. Exactly. Of course, if users don't update within a week or less, there are already automated scripts scanning the internet and trying to exploit these vulnerabilities on websites. So of course, if users were not updating their plugin, they are vulnerable. The same happened some time ago. We published on our website a post where we've done some research from the Alexa top 1 million websites, and we noticed that only 25% actually updated their WordPress from 3.6 to 3.61, which was an actual security fix. There were a remote code execution problem with WordPress. So as we can see, it's not because WordPress is not insecure. The problem is that we are making it, the way we are using it, we are making it an easy target for hackers. We are making it very easy for hackers to come in, attack our websites and do whatever they want.
So a common question I get asked is, like, I'm starting a new website. Who would ever want to hack me and why? So I guess the question is, I want to ask you, what are these hackers after? And how come they are attacking anyone from big corporations to the smallest mom and pop shop or just blogger with a few posts on his website? How do people get targeted and why?
There are two types of attacks. There are the targeted attacks, as you just mentioned, and there are the automated attacks. So basically, in the targeted attack, we've seen big cases last year, like big companies like Sony, even banks, etc., where they are targeted. Usually, in that kind of attacks, a hacker specifically want to attack that part of that corporation, and they try to do the impossible to infiltrate that corporation and steal data from that company or just damage the reputation of that company. But apart from that, there's a lot of illegal activity going on the internet as well, such as, unfortunately, child pornography, illegal download of movies, anything you can imagine, illegal files, illegal software and everything. Now, me as a hacker, I don't want to store illegal software or illegal images on my computer. So what I would do is I try to scan the internet, and any vulnerable website I find, I just hack it to have control over it. And so for me, it's a place where I can store my files. Why would I do it? I would do it for the simple reason, because if I'm caught, I can be taken to court, and that's illegal. But if the images are on that, the illegal images, the illegal software is stored on a particular website which I hacked, the owner of that particular website is responsible for it. So hackers do not just hack for the credit cards, as we think, just to steal money. They hack to steal bandwidth as well, because especially at business level, bandwidth is very expensive. So to transfer things like torrents, etc., they need a lot of bandwidth. So instead of me paying for bandwidth, I would hack someone else's web server, a corporate website, store the torrents files there, and have them transfer from there, and let that corporation pay for the bandwidth. So that's one of the reasons, bandwidth. Secondly, is to store illegal data. That's very normal as well. Thirdly, is when you are used as a bot, what we say, as a robot, to launch bigger attacks. So, for example, lately there were Anonymous doing a lot of denial of service attacks on big corporations. That's what they were doing. They were hacking other computers, other web servers, because they need resources, and transforming them into an automated bot, so they can have a lot of processing power, a lot of bandwidth, a lot of everything, and they can attack other targets. So even if you have a simple website about, I don't know, cupcakes, whatever, I mean, you're always a target. And especially with automated attacks, as I explained earlier on, hackers are using automated tools to scan big chunks of the internet. So using WordPress, not using WordPress, they just start scanning. As soon as they find a particular exploit, which they can, a particular vulnerability which they can exploit, they will go for it. Whatever your website is, whatever it stores, and everything.
So another question is, how would a person know that his site has been hacked? Sometimes it's not always obvious. Like, you can have software running on your server for even months, and you wouldn't be able to detect that you've actually been hacked last year or whatever. One of the maybe symptoms can be a lot of spam comments, or it might be also unrelated. But how does a user know that he's been hacked?
We've seen cases where even large corporations, unfortunately, were hacked for years and they didn't even notice. So yes, it is quite difficult sometimes. It depends on the type of attack, but usually you would see, as you said, a lot of spam comments. You would see spikes in the traffic. So for example, if you had, I don't know, 1,000 visitors a day, and now you're having 20,000 visitors a day, it's a bit, there's something wrong with that. Even in terms of transfer rate, for example, if your website usually consumes 100 megabytes transfer rate every day, if instantly there's 1 gigabyte of transfer rate a day, then it means that someone is transferring something illegally. Something else, if you see a surge of traffic from a specific country, for example. So let's say your website caters only for the American market, and instantly you see a lot of traffic coming from Russia or China, then it means something illegal is going there. It's a lot of, as well, something else which is quite common when you see a particular page. For example, let's say you have a WordPress website with 200 blog posts, And every blog post has its own kind of style of traffic. But if one day this particular page became popular and got 10,000 visitors a day, then it means it might be something is going wrong in there. So as an indication, usually it's a spike in traffic, comments, spike in data transfer and things like that. That's the most common and obvious way how to determine that your website has been hacked.
So coming back to a person who is starting his own website, apart from themes and plugins, he's looking for hosting providers. Now, what's the difference between hosting providers per se, with regards to security, of course? And are there any types of security apart from the brands themselves? Types of hosting which are better as regards to security than others?
There is different in the way in terms of security from the hosting providers. Some of them, first of all, you can, as I said before, for plugins and themes, just by making a background check, you can easily find out how they usually tackle an incident if they are hacked or if one of their customers is hacked. Something else is, of course, some of them go the extra step. For example, let's say the most common, the cheap, low-cost type of hosting. They just give you some web space there and you can do whatever you want. And usually these are the most commonly hacked accounts. Some of them go the extra step. Some of them are, for example, tailored specifically for WordPress, and they can tell you exactly, listen, okay, there are these kind of problems with this kind of plugin. Maybe it's old, it's vulnerable. Some of them go an extra step. They also have kind of firewalls in front of the host of their hosted accounts. So yeah, there's always a huge difference between the low cost and the most expensive ones. Usually price, not always, but most of the time, price is a good indication of what they can do. What's important is in the beginning, of course, not everyone can afford a dedicated account, but shared account is kind of the most dangerous because the cheapest one, it's something which hackers typically use as well because it's very cheap to run. And so if the website hosted on your same server because it's shared is hacked, then you can have the most secure WordPress website in the world because they already have access to the server directly, to the database directly. So there's nothing you can do. Technically speaking, the more you can pay, the better it can get. But search. First, you can start by searching some history about the hosting provider, and then, of course, depending what type of website you want to have. If it's an e-commerce website, it's totally different. I would recommend, for example, to have a dedicated server with a dedicated IP, SSL, and things. That's something else, for example. Not all hosting providers support SSL. So there are different levels of things you can get. Always look into the website and search for the features and what you're looking for. Firewall, for example, it's a good thing to have, but it's not a must-have because if your WordPress is secure, it's nice. It's an additional layer of security, but it's something you can live without. So it always depends on the price as well.
Now, obviously, you can stay here and talk about security for ages, but what really is a better thing to talk about is what actually happened in recent months. What were the cases, the big cases where WordPress sites were hacked, and what can we learn from them?
The biggest cases we've seen this year were actually automated bots attacking WordPress login pages, dashboard, and they were using the most common usernames and passwords. For example, admin password. So that is, it's not just this year, it's the most common, using weak credentials and the default ones, because by default WordPress, when you're installing WordPress, you are assigned the admin username. I know you can change it, but many people don't change it. So most, as I've said earlier on, hackers are kind of exploiting this this problem the WordPress community has, that people are not so security aware and they use the default values or very easy passwords. So this is the real most common one. Secondly, the other one is exploiting vulnerabilities in old versions of WordPress. So the second one is, yes, old versions of WordPress are still running out there. They are vulnerable, and there are automated tools to scan a big chunk of the internet and find exploitable websites and hack them. So those are the two most common. So to counteract that, make sure you always use the latest version of the software and use very strong usernames and passwords. Those are the two. Of course, there are those kind of the other type of very targeted attacks, but then it can go into real detail. But these are the two. If you use strong passwords and use latest software, you're already like miles ahead of the community.
I know you've mentioned a lot of things and what users can do to actually protect their website. But before we wrap up, and I hope we found this discussion interesting, before we wrap up, I want you to if you can, list 5 things that users can actually go after seeing this video and implement on their website and improve through these ways the security on their WordPress websites.
One thing I like to mention as well, so once we're security is not just because, for example, you can hire an expert and do a security hardening, but you can ruin all his work a day after by creating an account with a weak password. So security is a process as well. It's not just what you can do today. So what's very important is the 5 security measures, I would say, is always keep your software up to date, not just WordPress, everything. Even the plugins you are using, the software you are using to upload files via FTP and everything. Where possible, use SSL for FTP and to the WordPress dashboard, because usually the connection when uploading files to WordPress or when you're connecting to the dashboard, logging in, the connection is clear text. And if there's a hacker in between, they can capture your connection. So by using SSL, you make sure that connection is encrypted. The third one is use strong usernames and passwords. Don't go for the defaults. Admin, hello, everyone knows these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, everyone knows these things. The fourth one is, of course, a website evolves. So we've seen a lot of cases where people are installing new plugins every week, every month, whatever, trying new things. When installing a plugin or a theme, make sure you always do some background check. You don't need to hire a private investigator. It just takes 10 to 15 minutes, check what there is. And the last one, which is very important as well, is backup. If you're hacked and you have a recent backup of your WordPress, you can instantly recover your website. Okay, that won't solve the problem of closing the security hole, but at least you can bring up your website. That's very important. Of course, then there are other things which you can do, like monitoring the website, and making sure you close the security holes. But those are the most common parts, especially backups. Especially if you have a blog, for example, and you post a blog once a week, make a backup exactly after you post that blog post. So if the next time you're hacked before posting another blog post, you can always restore the latest version of your website.
Thank you very much, Robert. Where can people contact you to learn more about security and maybe even hire you for your services and security?
Our website is www.vpwhitesecurity.com, and my email is robert@vpwhitesecurity.com. Feel free to get in touch, and thank you very much, John, for this interview.
Thank you for also being with us today, and we hope to see you soon. In the meantime, just check out our website wpmayor.com for more interesting articles about security and other things. See you.